and of course, the passage of time. The most comprehensive and lengthy depictions can be found in the Sumerian tablets.
In old Sumer, there were tablets found, and on these tablets you see beings which in archaeology they called winged gods or winged geniuses.
Before we cover the Sumerian knowledge of these ancient gods, we can also consider the similarity of the recorded chapters in the Bible. Here, the race are mentioned in several verses and named as the Nephilim. Genesis 6:4 reads as follows.
The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown.
And as the Bible says, they saw that the daughters of men were beauty, so they took them to wife. By the way, in sort of the Bible translation, they say, the fallen angels saw that the daughters of men were beauty, and they took them to wife. What is a fallen angel? They who descended. And not only in the Bible, you find this absolutely clear again in the book of Enoch. Enoch gives even the names of 36 of these extraterrestrial figures, which say, we want to go down there, we want to have sex, we want to do this, even if it's against what the Lord is the commander of the spaceship, says. And they had sex, and the result was some different creatures and giants and all these things.
In the Bible, this race of giants are called the Anakim. They are mentioned in the conquest of Canaan by the Israelites. According to the book of Numbers, Anak was a forefather of the Anakim. The Bible describes them as very tall descendants of the Nephilim, the daughters of men and sons of gods, and also fallen ones who existed before the deluge. The term Anunnaki has been translated in various forms and is the source of much controversy. Renowned author Zecharia Sitchin claims he has translated them as those from heaven came. Many scholars claim their interpretation is those of royal blood or those of princely offspring.
One friend and colleague of mine was Lawrence Gardner. He was tracking the whole significance of certain bloodlines going back into Mesopotamia. I was encountering exactly the same information coming in to my investigations of an alien presence on this planet and throughout the solar system. We found that we met at sort of a same point, and that was that in Mesopotamia, that all of the Anunnaki were supposed to be reptilian. And that the reptilian biology had blood that was dominated by copper. And that they literally had blue colored blood. We have red because we have an iron dominant blood. So our discussion from his history and my trying to get into it through aliens that have been dominating the earth was that the blue blood reptilians of Mesopotamia led to a group called the Merovingians. And the Merovingians tie later in the timeline directly to France, Germany, and that area of Europe, because for some reason, that bloodline, the blue bloods, went to Europe. Lawrence Gardner and other people's work coming through royalty, blue blood, tie this connection between the reptilians, Merovingians in Mesopotamia, and they were literally a reptilian blue blood line.
When you start looking at these subjects, whether it is on the web or in some books that people qualify as possibly conspiracy books, it is often spoken of a genetic lineage, reptilian and of royal blood. I do think that some royal bloodlines still exist nowadays that come from the Anunnas, specifically the lineage of Enlil, Ninurta, and On.
The Sumerians were said to have learned astrology from the Anunnaki, and this afforded them an in-depth knowledge of our solar system. Ancient carvings in the stone tablets show the various planets, and most incredibly they depicted the 10th planet. This planet actually orbits the Sun every 3,600 Earth years, and in doing so it comes fairly close to our Earth, Travelling on a huge elliptical orbit, this giant crusader loops into outer space, far out into our solar system, to eventually, after 3,600 years, circle back. When you consider our small moon, 1/6 of our planet's size, can affect our tides so easily, imagine what mayhem a huge, giant planet could cause should it manage to pass close to us. On the 30th of December in 1983, the Washington Post had a front page headline that actually read, "A heavenly body as large as the giant planet Jupiter, and possibly so close to Earth that it would be part of this solar system, has been found in the direction of the constellation Orion by an orbiting telescope aboard the IRAS. So mysterious is the object that astronomers do not know what it is." NASA have also recently conceded that there could very well be a large hidden planet out there, purely due to the gravitational effects they've been observing in our solar system. We do know that recently our modern astronomers have detected a 10th planet, larger than Pluto and nearly 4 times farther from the Sun as Pluto is today. Is this actually Nibiru? When we consider the question, why did they come, we need to revisit the first tablet of Lord Enki.
The king lists go back 266,000 years. Now that's kind of interesting because modern scientists believe that the first humans like us came into existence less than 200,000 years ago. And they believe that the first civilizations where you would have kings in urban areas and social organization, they believe that all started 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. So to have these Sumerian king lists going back 266,000 years is really amazing.
The actual artifact itself is engraved in cuneiform text. And during that time and era, people didn't just carve these types of things into stone just for a hobby. It's real information, real data, and real history. Now, the actual artifact itself is located in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, England. What's so incredible about it is that the King's List gives the reign of the kings in shars. Well, what is a shar? The Sumerians state that this shar is about 3,600 years. And for example, King Alalim actually ruled for 10 shars. So in human years, that would be 36,000 years.
When we look at the Sumerian Kings List, we see that the more recent part of the list actually corresponds very nicely with historical records. That's very interesting because when you look at the Kings List in its entirety, you go all the way back to the alleged origin of the Anunnaki on Earth tinkering with our DNA starting 250,000 years ago. Supposedly, when you get into this Sumerian doctrine, the idea is that we were created as a slave race approximately 250,000 years ago, and it was Enki, supposedly the good guy in the battle of the two brothers Enki and Enlil, who created us this way. And we were manufactured by Enki to become able to reproduce, whereas prior to that point, we were bred to be sterile so that they could make a certain number of these clones, they could send them out there to work, they die, and there's no threat of them becoming their own race.
It's not just the Sumerian Kings List, it's also the Egyptian Kings List of Manetho. Writes about the dynasties going back, maybe not as long, but at least 30,000 BC, gods like Thoth and others, deities that were called the 9 particular reigning deities of the Egyptian world. So if these deities have, again, lifespans of thousands of years, then of course to a human, it's going to seem as though they are gods.
Que les fameux dieux sumériens auraient créé l'Homo sapiens vers 300.
You have to know that when the gods arrived on Earth, according to what the tablets state, they reigned over the Earth for thousands of years. Elements of the story are in the Zohar, the Nag Hammadi text as well, which basically tell the same story, and the same version as the Sumerian one to enslave mankind. Human beings must behave, not think too much, and most of all, not see that there is another reality to what is said. In the texts of Eden, there is a curious scene. It describes humans specially created to work in the garden. But at some point, in order to enforce their laws, the gods place the humans in front of them. Behind the gods is their shiny chariot. That is how it is written. And they make them pledge allegiance. It is fascinating. They impose their views upon mankind. They want to scare them. And sadly, through this oath to which humanity commits, humans forbid themselves to ever be free. I personally think that to this day, we are still under the influence of this oath. It is crucial to understand that, in concrete terms, we are still slaves. I think that the gods knew what an oath implied. A vow is something tangible, something actually happens. And I think that this can be passed from one life to another.
As a species that was created by DNA manipulation, we've never been free from the manipulation of beings on the outside. And that the sad irony in history is the humans have gotten down on their knees to things standing in front of them that had the name God, and they were never gods.
When we look at our modern civilization and we think that we've evolved so much, let's not forget that Sumer is the cradle of civilization, and that so much of what started there is still in place in our modern world. This includes the entire system of how we measure time. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day. The way in which we structure our cities, the idea of plumbing, the idea of city planning with streets and buildings, all of that stuff comes directly from this Sumerian background, which seems to, in conventional historical view, pop up almost out of nowhere from what had been up until then a hunter-gatherer type of culture. We also see the whole basis of the Code of Hammurabi and written codified laws, which actually started again in Sumer. We see the development of a money system in Sumer. We see the roles of men and women, this sort of patriarchal society, also appearing in Sumer, and therefore so much of what we have in our modern world hasn't changed since the time of Sumer. And if we expand our consciousness a little bit and consider that the written history of Sumer is not what we hear about in our textbooks, that it actually is a 250,000-year-old civilization, it would appear that the gods built that civilization, or what some have called the archons, and that they in fact built this whole system on purpose to withstand the test of time and to create a form of silent tyranny. With the money system comes the ability for small groups of people to determine who lives and who dies, who eats and who starves, to become incredibly powerful, because there is no common sharing of the wealth of the planet. It seems to be acceptable to the people. It seems that it's a fair system, but it's very easily controlled by the elite power structure, and it allows them to effectively imprison an entire planet, and it allows them to wield an unnaturally high degree of control.
We were able to locate the divine mountain of the Anuna gods along with their Garden of Eden, thanks to the elements found with Google Earth and Gary Zeitling from NASA. It took us straight to eastern Turkey, close to Road 5651. What can be noted in the Sumerian tablets, when they clearly speak of creating workers to serve the Anunas, the main geneticist is always Enki. Enki is very proud of what he is doing. However, he always has to do it in secret. And here something important occurs in the research that I've carried out. In order to be able to secretly teach values, besides from changing their genetic code, in which he probably injected things that we cannot comprehend nowadays, the gods were using a specific language in Eden, the Emion language, the language that comes from the skies, the language which comes from On. In my years of research, I understood that the Emeshah the matrix language was mostly used by Sumerian priestesses. The so-called Emi Shah contained more particles than the languages used by the male gods. So Enki used the Emi Shah, the matrix language, to encode the ancient languages we find on Earth. I think that Enki had the desire to work for the benefit of the human race, to secretly bring them knowledge. And to be able to do that, they had to use a code. So they created a linguistic code for each tribe. And I think that regularly, maybe every generation, they had to change the code to prevent the Anunnas from finding out about the hidden knowledge.
The Anunnaki came to Earth, according to Sitchin's translations, 430,000 years ago, looking for gold. And boy, did they find it. And they were mining gold on a level that we can't even begin to imagine. Enki, the Sumerian entity who was put in charge of the gold mining exercise in the southern hemisphere, in the Abzu, found gold, and that's where he established his gold mining empire. And the translations in the Sumerian tablets tell us over and over and over again that the Anunnaki came here looking for gold. They found it in spectacular amounts, but they needed help to get it out of the ground. And they decided to clone a species that could do the work, to go into the ground and extract the ore and get the gold out of the ground. The DNA, genetic material from Homo erectus, was taken and it was blended with the Anunnaki DNA. And there's some amazing references in the Sumerian translations that refer to southern Africa and the Abzu that he refers to, where the gold was found.
Right.
And that's why they settled there, and he established the gold mining headquarters there, and that's where the species was cloned.
Can't wait? Check out the links in the description for a great